And when we talk about California natives, California is a huge state. It has a ton of different climates. So we'll be covering a lot of California natives, but just keep in mind that they will cover many portions of the state. But here in the Bay Area, again with our summer dry climate, the plants, if you go out on hikes, you are going to find plants that have adapted to the conditions that we have here. So that sometimes people don't think to bring that concept into their gardens. And there's a lot of different ways to garden, and every one of them is wonderful. Today I'm going to focus on plants that do well with that summer dry conditions. And also, one added benefit of planting natives is that the local pollinators, our birds, butterflies, bees, so forth, other little critters, are used to finding these plants in our area. So that I'll be touching on that as we get into talking about the plants. So plants do adapt in various ways. So there are some Mediterranean style plants that develop a deep root system. They can survive periods of dryness because when it does rain, the rain soaks deep into the soil, and because they're not losing a lot of moisture through their leaves. So one thing that's really interesting to me, I should say also that I'm a nurseryman at Grand Lake Ace Garden Center, so I have a lot of experience helping customers with their plants, helping them design parts of their garden and so forth. So I have a fair amount of practical experience apart from my own garden working with plants. So, but one thing that's interesting to me is that the type of leaf that plants have is somewhat of an indication. Oh, did we just lose it again? Okay, somewhat of an indication of how drought tolerant they will be. So, for example, over here on the left, what's in bloom here, the Verbina Lilacina dulamina, has really delicate sort of crinkly leaves, so it's not losing a lot of moisture through its leaves. Whereas if you have plants that have soft, large leaves, they're expelling water through their leaves much more so, and those are plants that typically require more moisture. So, but plants do adapt in different ways. So I'll get to that as we get into the plants. But it's interesting to me that you can literally just walk through a nursery and go, oh yeah, that'll be drought tolerant. Oh, that won't be. Yeah, that'll be. And then as you get familiar with where plants originate from, so Australia, most of the Australian native plants are really drought tolerant because it's very dry there, except on the west coast. So you can also, that's part of to me, the interesting learning curve about plants is just knowing where they're from and what kind of conditions they're used to. So it's worth mentioning too that when we talk about a Mediterranean climate, that isn't just literally the Mediterranean and the California, most of California, but the coast of Chile, for example, is a Mediterranean climate. South Africa has a Mediterranean, the tip of South Africa has a Mediterranean climate. So it's sort of, and I say that because when you find plants from those regions, you kind of know that they're going to work well in our environment. So it's great to plant natives, and I'm very much a pro-natives person, and Annie's is as well. But I'll talk as we get into the plants a bit about what are called bay-friendly plants. So bay-friendly plants, they aren't necessarily native to California or endemic to California, but they share a lot of the same very positive qualities as the drought-tolerant native. So drought-tolerant, resilient, um, it can handle different kinds of soils, and are good for local pollinators. So we get asked this a lot, and people come in the nursery wanting help, and they want natives, and so we start off talking about that, and then if it's appropriate, I will say, oh, well, there's also this sort of, think of natives as these plants within a circle, and then bay-friendly plants being a wider circle kind of surrounding that. So if they're open to that, then I'll say, well, there's also, so for example, we'll get to it, but rosemary. People, rosemary is one of those forgotten plants in a way. It is really one of the great, great garden plants. Just one of the toughest plants you will ever grow. And when people come in and say, oh, I want to plant something for bees, it's like, oh, well, rosemary. How many people have rosemary plants in their garden? Yeah. And so you've seen it. I mean, once they're in bloom, the bees just flock over there. So anyway, so there is sometimes this idea that if you're planting California natives, or if you're planting stuff that's really, really drought tolerant, that it's going to be somewhat boring, or it's not going to be many flowers. That is absolutely not the case. There is just a huge selection of plants, and we live in one of the gardening and nursery meccas in the whole country. There's more nurseries and more plants and a greater variety of plants available here than just about anywhere in the rest of the country. And that's because we can garden here 12 months a year if you want. So nurseries have adapted to that. And, you can walk out here to Annie's at the end of January, early February, and there's still tons of plants for sale. So it's, I grew up in British Columbia, and true winter, and sometimes I'll call home in January and say, oh, I just came in from the garden, and I can just hear them shaking their heads. It's like 20 degrees up there or something. Okay, so I just wanted to say that there is a huge selection, and what I'm going to cover today is really just a relatively small subset of all the plants that will do well in a summer dry garden environment. This is a real informal talk, so if you have questions or want to make a comment, feel free to do so. I'm going to move on and talk about the plants now. Did anyone have a question or a comment before I move on? Okay. Oh, all right.
It's just a comment, really. A lot of us live in very high wildfire zones.
Yes.
So some of these plants will be not a great idea within a house.
Yes. Did people hear that comment? Living in wildfire areas, that you really have to be concerned about what kind of plants are, within 100 feet or several hundred feet of your home, just things that might burn really quickly. So I'm not really going to address that in particular, but it's a valuable point. Just as a footnote, I mentioned South Africa as being one of the Mediterranean climate areas, and they have a lot of wildfires that are just part of the natural ecosystem in South Africa, and there are plants that have specifically adapted themselves to that, to the point that some plants, some of the shrubs, will wait for a fire to spur the production of seed on the ground, because the fire leaves a lot of material on the ground that is actually rich in elements. So then when the rain comes, so the plants have kind of figured this out. Plants are very adaptive that way. Okay, so let's move on. So we'll bring up our. Okay, so lavender. I'm going to cover a few plants that are still common, but maybe a little variety. So there are two, actually three. Yeah. French lavender and Spanish lavender. So they're all really drought tolerant. They all attract bees and butterflies to your garden. The leaves are all fragrant. The main difference is in the leaf and or the flower. So the English ones, that's the really popular common ones, like Provence lavender, even though Provence is an area in the south of France, it's actually an English lavender, or Phenomenal, which I believe Annie sells. Phenomenal is very similar. And that's your classic lavender with the tall, thin stems of tiny purple flowers. Very, very familiar. The Spanish, and there's quite a range in height from about a foot tall to 3.5, 4 feet tall with the English lavenders. The Spanish is usually about 2 feet tall, and the flower is different. I call them wings. So it has these larger little flaps that are usually a sort of a wine color, very pretty. And there's one, and Annie's does carry it, that's one of my favorites, called Silver Anook. So although I'm going to go back to what I said about, there's lots of Mediterranean plants that aren't boring and have lovely flowers and so forth, but it's also true that as you get into that whole group of plants, the foliage and the form of the plant, you start being more finely attuned to that and finding pleasure in that. And that'll be especially true when I get into the ground covers and aloes and agaves and yuccas. But the silver anook has this really beautiful grayish silver foliage. And then again, it's a Spanish lavender, so about 2 feet tall with those little wings. And it isn't necessarily true that Mediterranean plants have a lighter color leaf, but a lot of them do, and we'll get into that as you can almost see from what's on the table here that the foliage is more of a grayish green kind of color. There's a lot, you see a lot of that in the Mediterranean grouping of plants. Okay, so, and this is, this is the silver anook that's up on screen. Okay, so, can you?
There's a lot of glare, but
yeah, not much I can do about that, unfortunately. You maybe sit where you don't get the glare. How many people are familiar with California sagebrush, Artemisia? Yeah, I love recommending this plant in our nursery because this.
It's growing out of the rock.
Oh, what is that? Artemisia californica. So sometimes called wormwood. It was used medicinally by many different cultures. But most of the wormwoods, and here's the canyon gray right here with this lovely silvery, sort of a dusty color foliage. And there are quite a few different artemisias as well. So some are really low, but some can form bushes 3 to 4 feet tall. So they can be used as sort of a high ground cover, or you can have them as really almost like a focal point in your garden, and especially if you're featuring silvery tones. Super drought tolerant. They need virtually no water in the summertime. They're just incredibly tough plants. They don't really, the flower is sort of insignificant on them, but you're buying it for and then also for a lot of plants too, they have this really soft texture to them, which is its own pleasure. How many people have kids? Oh, not too many. Kids love to touch things, so I'll actually be doing a talk next month on planting a children's garden, and that's one of the things I'll be talking about. So yeah. So it's a hard question to answer. Most lavenders are evergreen, but they don't like the cold, wet weather. So they can look rather poor in the wintertime. So there's no harm in cutting them back in the wintertime, and cutting them back will just stimulate new growth. So and that's true of many plants, not just lavenders. Should say also that lavenders are good for 3 or 4 years, and then they get really woody. I don't know if anyone's had that experience, but yeah, they get woody, and then it's hard to get them to look as nice as you want them to. We get people coming in the nursery all the time. It's like, what's wrong with my lavender? How old is it? That's always my first question. So that may be true of a few other plants in your garden as well. And getting into pruning, that's a whole other story. But I used to be very hesitant to prune. I think my mic went out again. Going in and out. Can people hear me just talking like this? Oh, there it goes. Okay. I used to be hesitant to prune, but I've gotten over that when I've seen how beneficial it is to plants. And we sometimes, I'm not covering roses today, although roses actually could fit into a Mediterranean style gardening scheme as well. But a woman came in the other day and she was having problems with the rose, and I said, well, just cut the canes back about 1/3 each way. And she said, well, it's already kind of starting to bloom. And I said, don't worry about it. Just cut it back. It'll leaf out in like a week. They're amazing plants, roses. So it's generally true of a lot of shrubs that selective pruning can sometimes be very beneficial. Okay, so Backus. Anyone have a Backus in their garden? Oh, a couple of people. Yay! I'm always heartened by that, because it's one of those plants that a lot of people have never heard of. But if you hike in the hills, like you go into the North Bay and hike in the hills, I have a friend, we go hiking, and we see those bushes all the time. And they look like sagebrush at first glance, because they have sort of wiry stems. But they had their own beauty, and they have kind of almost a desert kind of feel to them. And sometimes that's a nice addition to a garden to offset other lush things. Or sometimes people have a whole dry garden bed, or perhaps that's the dominant theme in their garden. So Backus can work in there very well. So it's a little slow to bloom, Backus, but the people who have it, has it bloomed for you?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so it gets smothered in these little white flowers, and it's spectacular when it's in bloom. Did you have a?
I had a question. After talking to friends, etc., botanists, etc., they said I was worried about hacking it down, like pruning it.
Yeah.
And it really reacts well to pruning.
Oh, good to hear.
But I was afraid of killing it.
Yeah.
No, it's really good.
Oh, good. Yeah, so she was just saying that she had pruned her Backus plant, and she was worried that might really harm it, but it bounced back really well. Again, don't want to get into pruning, but there is, when you're talking about shrubs, there is old wood and new wood. So when you prune back, you want to stay in the new wood, not go into the old wood, because then it may not sprout out of the old wood. It's kind of hard to explain, but yeah, pruning really can invigorate plants. The other thing about Backus, and the one that Annie sells is called Pigeon Point, which is a lower growing one, is it's a great plant for hillside stabilization. So if you have a hill and it tends to, you get a lot of soil sliding off, or even if you just have an area where you can't really water it and you're not really going to tend to it that much, Backus is a great plant to put in there. Okay, so this is out of order. Let's see here. Yeah. Oh. Oh, okay. I just didn't have any Ceanothus photos. So Ceanothus, I won't spend a lot of time on this just because they're so well known, and they are, I sometimes joke, what is the perfect plant? Well, Ceanothus would fall in that category. It is very drought tolerant. It attracts all kinds of pollinators. Birds collect the seed in the fall. It's fantastic when it's in bloom. It's a habitat plant for small animals in the wild. It will grow in any kind of soil. It can handle baking heat. It can handle part shade. It really is one of those perfect plants. And there are a lot of different ones. So Julia Phelps is one of the most popular. That might be the best-selling one. Speak louder.
Do you have other plants you consider perfect plants like that?
Well, yeah, I don't want to get sidetracked. Sorry, but there are a few more on this list. I'll get to them. Another really nice one is a Thyrsiflora skylark, which has a lighter blue. The flower colors mostly range from sort of lavender blue up to a bright purple, really showy. And then sometimes people want something taller. So most of the Ceanothus are in the 4 to 8 foot height range. There are some lower growing ground cover types. Very much recommend a horizontalis, Yankee Point, things like that, which are great. Also great for hillside stabilization or sort of a plant and forget. That's an area in our nursery I'd like to have. Plant and forget. And I have a feeling that a lot of people would just make a beeline right for that section. And yeah, low maintenance. But there is also a taller variety for Ceanothus called Ray Hartman. Anyone have a Ray Hartman in their garden by any chance? There we go. Yay. 2. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So they and they're so versatile. The other thing, talk about a perfect plant. Gee, can I use it as a hedge? Well, yes, you can use Ceanothus as a hedge too. They are just so amazingly adaptable. And a couple of years ago, a woman came in our nursery and she really liked the Ray Hartman, and she said, well, can I use this as a screening tree? I said, yes, you can. So that's what she ended up doing, using it as a screen plant. Okay.
Can you talk about lifespans? Because it seems like it's quite variable.
Yeah, it's. I want to cover a lot of different plants, so that is best done by going to the website. But because there's such variation. I'm so popular, people are coming in by train for the talk. Ceanothus, though, as a group, very long-lived. I'm sure there are ceanothus growing in the hills, Northern California, that have been there for 30, 40, 50 years. I mean, they are incredibly long-lived. So, but it just varies. So much of how a plant lasts in your garden is the growing conditions, and also just like 2 years ago, or last year, we had all that rain and the cold, wet weather, and we had a parade of people coming into our nursery saying, "What is wrong with my plant?" Well, we just kept saying the same. So things like that can alter. There's so many. The environment has such an impact on how plants do. So, yeah. All right. So let's go on to. Oh, let me just also state again that ceanothus are one of the great plants for pollinators. Butterflies, bees, songbirds will collect the seed. So leave the seed on the bush, even, it has to flower first and then it produces seed. Leave that on because you'll get like little titmice, sparrows, juncos, various birds that collect seed coming over to your shrubs. So a plant on the end here that's in bloom, Verbina lulacina dolomina. How many people have that in their garden? Yeah, it's another perfect plant. You're asking about perfect plants. This is another one right here. Someone here, I can't remember, I'm sorry, I've forgotten who it was, came up and was talking about this in her garden, saying that she hadn't watered it in forever, and other plants had suffered a little bit, but this was just still going strong, and that didn't surprise me at all. It's amazing to me that not everyone has this in their garden, because it is the easiest thing to grow. It blooms forever. It blooms 6-8 months of the year. Butterflies especially love it, and it is just incredibly drought tolerant. And of course, it's a California native. There's a non-native, the yes, thank you, Bonariensis. And you've probably seen that. The Bonariensis will take root and grow in like an inch of soil. It grows in cracks in the sidewalk. I mean, that just goes to show you how tough a lot of Verbena plants are. But the native one, to me, is the one to get. It stays a nice compact, about 3 feet by 3 feet. It's evergreen. And as I say, it's especially good for butterflies. You probably know, by the way, that flowers that have an upright, especially a globe or large open-faced flower, those are the flowers that butterflies especially really seem to like. Of course, they're after nectar. That has to have nectar, but they like something to land on and sun themselves on, and so. Even though the globes on this verbena aren't huge, there's tons of them. But it's also a great bee plant. I see bees on mine all the time.
It's fragrant. It's sweet fragrant.
Yeah, it is. Different people have different sensitivities of smell. I get a little fragrance off it, but you're right. It does have this very pleasing woodsy scent. About 3 feet by 3 feet. Yeah.
I'm having trouble keeping mine looking as fresh and full as it did the first 2 years that I used one.
And have you been pruning it?
It's so hard to prune it because it's always in bloom.
I know.
So I'll prune most of it, but
Right.
it just doesn't come back the way it
Yeah. So what she is saying is that she's having trouble keeping her Verbina looking its best, and she's reluctant to prune it because it's always in bloom. I wouldn't let that stop you from pruning it.
Like, just take the whole thing.
You know, it's hard to, I would say taking it back a foot maybe. Yeah, it's,
Or you can start out small and then you can go in a little further down the street. Send the plant up to
yeah, a lot of gardening is not trial and error, but just trying to figure the best way to do things and then doing them and seeing how your plant reacts. So yeah, we try and do things smartly, but yeah, gardening is definitely, there's always a little bit of trial and error with gardening.
Can I just make a comment?
Sure.
I mean, because people like to focus on something being densely flowered and like, you know, but if you let something that's native, that grows wild, and it gets a little bit leggy, but if it's next to other things that are doing the same thing, they mix themselves together and they sort of fill in each other's spaces, and it's really pretty.
It's a good point. You know, it's, I think a certain amount of wildness in one's garden can be attractive, and especially here where we're focusing a lot on California natives and plants that manage to thrive in dry conditions. They're not always going to be picture perfect in terms of shape. So, yeah. Okay, so let's see. Oh, wait. Okay. I did already talk about the rosemary a bit, so I'll just mention again that there are basically two types. There's the upright shrub types, which is usually what people grow as an ornamental, and then there's the ground cover, which people use just as a super tough fill-in, spillover. A lot of people practice vertical planting, so you can have bulbs below the ground, you can have a low growing plant, and then you can have an upright plant, at least one upright plant. So ground covers can be planted by themselves and serve all kinds of purposes and be very beautiful in their own way, but they can also combine with other things that are popping up above them. So all rosemary is edible, obviously, but for some reason people seem to prefer the upright shrub varieties for cooking. And in fact, there's one called barbecue, and they call it that because it has especially thick stems, and you can actually use the stems as a kind of a skewer for barbecuing, apparently. So I thought that was kind of fun.
Before you leave rosemary, it is actually one of the most flammable plants you can put in your garden, so they recommend that you keep it 30 feet away.
Oh, okay. See, I did not know that.
Yeah, they usually recommend not, like, only one or two in the garden.
Okay. I mean, look.
It's the volatile
Oh, it's the oils.
needles.
It's
They leave a lot of duff, and they have shreddy bark as they get older. All of those
okay.
make for a highly flammable plant, nearly as bad as juniper.
okay.
Is there a list of those plants on the California?
Well, there's some that everyone's agreed upon.
Okay.
Often it's how you maintain them and where you put them. And I would say no juniper period,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, no.
And I would say one or two rosemary, keep them green, and when they start getting woody, you toss them and start over. Yeah.
I think you could check the Cal Fire website.
Cal Fire, I was
A lot
Yeah.
of it is based on irrigation. They said that.
Right.
Yeah, if you keep things hydrated.
yeah.
Fire Safe Marin is beginning to put together some plants, but it's been a tough great because there are plants that if you maintain them in a specific way, you can mitigate the risk a lot.
Okay, I should probably keep going, but thank you. Yeah, thank you for that comment. There is a really nice low-growing rosemary called Huntington Carpet for people who want to use that as a ground cover. So keep that in mind. And then we'll get to salvias here in a moment, but bush marigolds, Tagetes lemonii, does anyone have that in their garden? It is, yeah, it's another one. I don't know if it's a perfect plant, but it's close to it in that it's one of those plant and forget about plants almost. It doesn't look like it would be drought tolerant because it forms a fairly large bush, has lots of leaves, it blooms prolifically, but in fact it is it is incredibly drought tolerant and will put up with the most unfavorable conditions. In fact, some people don't plant it in their garden because it will sometimes self-seed and you have all of these new plants popping up. But it is still, when people come in and say, I really need something very drought tolerant, but I want lots of flowers. Do you have anything yellow? It's like, well, yes, I do. And so I'll take them over to those Tagetes.
I like to mention that deer eat it. So I planted around some Peruvian lilies that the deer like to chomp, and they don't go that way anymore. So that's another use people. I don't know why, they just hate it. They don't like to brush it.
No, a lot of plants don't like it either. If you put it in your tomatoes,
Yeah. So that's another plus.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, let's move on and talk about some salvias. There's so many different kinds of salvias, and many California natives, many that are still wonderful salvias. I'm going to talk a bit about a few of the natives, and the one that a lot of people may be familiar with, Salvia apiana, sometimes called white sage, and it's the one that people make smudge sticks from, if anyone knows what smudge sticks are, yeah, for ritual purposes, cleansing. But grown as an ornamental, it's really a beautiful, it's very silvery. I don't know if you can make out the photo, but it is... and then the flowers aren't quite as showy as on some of the salvias, but just the silvery foliage, and also it's one of the most aromatic, of course, of all the salvias. And it is super tough. It's a little bit of a misnomer that every salvia is very drought tolerant and very tough and will grow anywhere. That there are some that need more specific environments, but Salvia apiana is definitely one of those that will grow anywhere. Okay, so bee's bliss. This is one. This might be our best-selling salvia at our nursery. People, I think, just the fact that it has "bee" in the title, but it also is one of the toughest of the sages, and it will get the Salvia apiana gets 3 to 4 feet tall and maybe 3 feet wide. And that's true of the bee's bliss as well. That's about its typical size, and can handle very adverse conditions. So yeah, and yes, as the name implies, very much a bee magnet. And surprisingly, not every salvia is the first choice for bees, but there are some, and bee's bliss is definitely one of them. All right, hummingbird sage. Who has a hummingbird sage in the garden? Spathaceae. Oh, okay, a number of people. I love this plant, and we can hardly keep it in stock when we get it in, and it's this is one of the plants that actually is a salvias. It's a little different, so it's not quite as drought tolerant as some of the other salvias, which virtually can go without water for the entire summer. But it's still drought tolerant and still worth planting in a summer dry garden. But it's really different, and it has these very large, rough textured leaves, which are quite attractive. And then the flowers are incredibly showy, that sort of pinkish burgundy color. Yeah, very, very, it doesn't get as big as some salvias, about 2 feet tall. And it doesn't look its best in the wintertime, but usually bounces back in the next spring. And it is, and you can see from the photo, if you can see the photo, it has a little bit more of a tubular flower. Some of the salvias, a lot of salvias have tulip flowers that are kind of more of an open flower, whereas the Spratheaceae is a little more tubular. And of course, hummingbirds like almost every flower that's tubular. So, okay. So, most of what I've been covering till now has been shrubs. And I want to talk about a few low-growing plants as well, ground covers. And the first step is the Eriogonum, which are called California buckwheats. And they are one of the great plants for any kind of planting scheme, not just for a summer dry garden, but you can use it for almost any scenario. So the one that we have, let's see, I think I remember. Yeah, so yeah, this is the Canna Creek. Yeah, so the Canna Creek is one of the ones with a yellow flower. But there are half a dozen different Eriogonums on the market. They're all relatively low. They spread out. They're really drought tolerant. They're one of the great pollinator plants for your garden. So they produce a copious amount of seed. So you want to leave let the flowers dry, and so the seed forms, and then songbirds will come gather the seed. And they're one of those, if there's no moisture, they'll just kind of hunker down and wait it out. And then when moisture arrives, then they just go through this growth spurt. And so the Undulatum aureum, the yellow flowers, but also the Grande rubescens has these lovely rosy pink flowers. That's the one that a lot of people have because it's more commonly available in various nurseries. So Eriogonum's also, California buckwheat's also a great plant for soil stabilization, and it doesn't form a really big root system, more of a lateral root system. So you can actually plant it in fairly shallow beds, and it will just find a way to adapt. Grows in the wild. It grows on real sandy soils and rocky outcrops. It's very, very adaptable plant. And another great plant for butterflies. So, okay, so let's see here. Just have to remember what I have photos for. So Zauschneria, which has been, most people refer to it now as Epilobium, and but Annie still has it classified as Zauschneria. But I just want to say that's the same thing. Sometimes called California fuchsia. It is one of the great plants for a summer dry garden. There's a place up the street from our nursery that no one clearly is watering this, and a lot of the plants, don't look real great, but no, the Epilobium is flourishing and in bloom most of the summer. Hummingbirds adore the flowers, and it is so versatile in how you can use it. So you can use it as a straight ground cover, you can grow it out of the hanging basket, you can have it spill over a low rock wall, you can mix it in with other things, and a little bit of upkeep in the wintertime will help it, but once it warms up, then it really flourishes. Likes the warm weather, so it needs to be in a good amount of sun to be happy. But just one of those, seems like something you would need to water semi-frequently, but actually is just incredibly drought tolerant. Oh, and there's the canum. Okay, so we're going to come to this in a minute, but I also wanted to mention Mimulus, sticky monkey flower. Sometimes people, I want a California native that has pretty flowers, and so, show them Mimulus. But it's often overlooked how tough a plant Mimulus is. Like when I'm hiking in the North Bay, I'll see it growing in the poorest possible soil, mostly rocks, and yeah, there it is, and it's in bloom. The Mimulus, in fact, sometimes when people come in and say, "Oh, my Mimulus died," and I say, "Well, how often were you watering it?" "Oh, every couple of days." I'm like, "No, way too much water." So they don't actually like a whole lot of water. So yeah, and there's now a million different Mimulus out there. Should say, though, that the ones that I recommend, because they are the drought-tolerant ones, are the Aurantiacum, either the straight Aurantiacum or the hybrids of Aurantiacum. Or, for example, there's this new series, it's a hybrid, called the Jelly Bean series. Annie sells a few of those. The way that you can tell whether it's a drought-tolerant Mimulus is by the leaves. They call it sticky monkey flower because the leaves literally are sticky. So, in fact, there's a little Mimulus growing right over here. It's actually one of the water-loving Mimulus. So there are Mimulus that actually want lots of water, and so we're after the drought-tolerant ones.
Could you touch the plant for us so we can go over later? Or you might not be able to.
Yeah, but after the talk, I can show you. It's a really cute little Mimulus. Okay, so gonna have to keep moving here. So there is a term xeriscape. Are people familiar with that term xeriscape? So generally, it just means very dry conditions. And in a way, it is the definitive term for a summer dry garden. So there are a whole group of plants that fit into that xeriscape. And I just selected a few in part because Annie sells them. But and that would be agaves and aloes and yuccas. Does anyone have any of those in their garden? Yeah. All of them, yeah. They are. So we've got a couple agaves up here. This is the blue glow on this side, and the whale tongue on the right side, my right. Yeah, yuccas. How many people have been out to Ruth Bancroft's garden? Fabulous, fabulous, fabulous. If you want to get inspired to plant a summer dry garden, go out to Ruth Bancroft. It is really a local treasure. It's out in Walnut Creek, very easy to get to. You can spend half a day there wandering. It's a pretty good sized garden. But they
is also a lot closer.
What's that?
Wave garden.
Oh yes, the Wave Garden. Yeah, I've been out to the Wave Garden. Yeah, especially here.
It's like 8 minutes.
Yeah, it's a free garden. It's actually a private property, but they allow people to come in and It's a little hard to find, but yeah,
That's kind of like a landmark.
yeah. It is a great, and they do have some wonderful agaves and aloes and a lot of xeriscape stuff there because they hardly water it at all. And it has these great views looking out over the bay, and yeah. So
It's a lot closer.
Oh,
yeah, if you're coming from Richmond, yeah.
I just want to say all of this category is great in a fire seat garden with gravel mulch.
So anyway, agaves. We'll start with agaves. There's a great selection. And that's what made me think of Ruth Bancroft because they have dozens and dozens of different varieties out there. They range from very small, compact species, like the blue glow only gets to be about 2 feet by 2 feet. There's some that are even smaller than that, whereas the whale tongue is a larger, more like a 4 foot with much wider leaves. Some of them have really sharp points. You have to be careful, and some of them have teeth along the edges. But in terms of having, apart from the drought-tolerant qualities, these 3 plants, the agaves, aloes, and yuccas, are great architectural plants because they tend to have rigid forms that stay nice and neat and just have that architectural look to them, and a lot of people love that look.
Is this one a native one? I forgot which one the native one is.
This one, I thought it was a native.
But it's not a native to the Bay Area.
It's not a native, yeah. I think it's, I'm actually not sure about this, but I think it might be like Baja or a place like that. So, yeah. The Perrii itself is a native, and Truncata. This is the one that tends to be in the trade more. Agaves, super drought tolerant, very low maintenance. It takes them a while to bloom. That's one thing so you probably don't want to expect flowers. But when they do bloom, they put up these tall spikes, depending on the agave, with these beautiful cup-shaped flowers. Yeah. And let's see here. Just 1 second here. I'll just say from my notes here, the whale tongue agave, 8 to 12 inch wide leaves, 2 to 5 feet tall, 3 to 6 feet wide over an 8 to 10 year period. That's the thing about agaves, especially as they're slow growing. So we occasionally have little pots, 4-inch pots of agaves, and I always tell, they spend less money, but you're going to be waiting a long time before that ever really looks like anything. So sometimes it is better to start a bit. The whale tongue agave, though, grows a little faster than something like the blue glow. So, but a lot of nurseries are growing. When we went through that long drought period a few years ago, nurseries wised up and began growing more xeriscape plants, including a lot more agaves and yuccas and aloes. So now, we have a big selection in our nursery of these kind of plants, which I'm very happy about. Okay, so there's many, of the 3, the agave, aloe, and yucca. Probably the aloes are probably the most diverse and the most wide-ranging. At any given time, we usually have I don't know, 15 different kinds of aloes in our nursery, and sometimes we'll have 20 or 25. So they're easy to grow. They bloom much quicker than the other two in this category. Just as drought tolerant, most of them. They tend to have softer leaves, although there are some that have rubbery, spiny leaves as well. This aloe ferox that's up on the screen here is really one of the loveliest ones, and this is very typical of a lot of aloes like this in the form that it has, and then the spikes coming up. And aloes with agaves and yuccas, they usually only put up a single spike. Eventually, they'll put up a couple spikes, but aloes are much quicker to put up multiple spikes. You can see in this photo, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. So the nice thing about the aloes are the form, the color, the texture, the height, and the color of the flower. The flowers range from yellow to orange to sort of a orangey red. And the other thing about aloe flowers that's so great that a lot of people don't know about, hummingbirds. Hummingbirds love aloe flowers. And a lot of aloes bloom in the late winter, early spring when not much else is in bloom. So it really gives hummingbirds something to feed on in the sort of off season, if you will. Yeah. Okay, so I think we got, oh yeah, so this is the color guard. So this is Yucca filamentosa color guard. And this is a good example of how the foliage itself can be the really attractive element, the main feature. And you can see just the prominent yellow ribs on this variety. And this is a yucca that blooms fairly quickly. I say quickly, in 3 or 4 years, which is sort of fast for yucca. But even when it's not in bloom, to me it's a really beautiful plant. So just as drought tolerant. Also, most of these 3 aloe, agave, and yuccas are very cold hardy. There's a few that aren't from further south, but a lot of them are, in fact, and of course in the Bay Area, we usually don't get much below 34, 35 degrees. So there's no danger in planting most of these varieties. Okay, so I just want to say, and I know I'm kind of rushing along here, but we're kind of almost out of time, but just wanted to say a little bit about care. I mentioned in the beginning it's going to end up just a few comments about care. How many people use drip irrigation in their gardens? Yeah, quite a bit. So most of the summer dry plants that I've mentioned, you do not want on drip irrigation. So that can be a little tricky, because if you've got a line running through a part of your garden and some of the plants, we get asked this a lot. Like, oh, some of these plants are doing well and some are not. Well, you're planting plants on the same line that have different water needs. That's what's going on. So as I say, most of these plants, once they're established, need very, very low water. So between once every 2 weeks to once a month, and for some, once every couple months. The aloes, the yuccas, and the agaves need virtually no water in the summertime. So it's always difficult to tell customers, take it off the drip, because they're so used to having that. But it's just tricky to get the right amount of water, and then almost nothing else that would be on that line could go that long without water. So I always just say, take it off the drip irrigation. Most of these plants are going to want to be in fast draining soil. So again, the comment about that plant that was being overwatered, like the Mimulus, for example, that's just an indication that you need really fast draining soil. In their native habitats, they're usually in sandy, rocky kind of soil. So whether you're putting it in a pot or putting it in the ground, you really the nutrition is not that important to this whole category of plants, which is another thing that's kind of in their favor for most of them, but really fast drainage. So use liberal amounts of pumice or sand or perlite, or I like pumice as a go-to for improving drainage. And then the other thing I want to say, just to end up, is in terms of watering, and this will depend. So the aloes, agaves, and yuccas really don't need to be mulched. They're so drought tolerant, and in their native habitat, they're usually in wide open spaces. So it's not like a lot of tree litter is falling that is around their roots. So they really don't need mulching. But there are, for some of the other plants we've been talking about, mulching actually can be, as it is for many parts of your garden, a good way to just keep in the little bit of moisture you are giving them. And for a lot of these plants, especially the shrubs and the trees, you want to, again, once they're established, water deeply. You don't want to water very often, but try and give them deep watering, because you want the roots of the plants to chase the water deeper down into the soil. So that's less of an issue for the real xeriscape plants, but again, the things like the ceanothus or the Backus, the Artemisia, things like that, in nature, they've sent their roots deeper into the soil. Because again, winter rains soak up the moisture and bury it in the ground. So that's how they're accessing it. So it's so funny because, again, just to kind of sum up here to end, that people are always a little surprised when it's clear that they've been overwatering one or more of their plants, and we as nurserymen tell them, "Oh, you're watering it too much." It's like a foreign concept to them that they could actually give a plant too much water, because we've all had plants die on us because I forgot to water that for a couple of weeks, and it really did need water. But again, that's the beauty of plants that fit into that summer dry scheme, is that they just, they are the ultimate low maintenance plants. So anyway, I think that's any last questions?
Yeah, would you put Matilda hot poppy on that list too?
That's actually, I'm glad you mentioned that. I can't believe I left that off the list. So Matilda poppy is what she's talking about, sometimes known as the fried egg plant, because of the huge white flowers, and it's a California native. There's a really nice stand of it up at the UC Botanical Garden for anyone that's been up there in the California section, and it is incredibly drought tolerant, and it's prolific. Once it gets established, it has really deep, massive roots, the plants that help it survive long dry summers. I've seen it growing in the wild where it's, it hasn't gotten water for 3 months or something, and it's still, happy and in bloom. What's that? Once they really get established, because they have a really deep root system.
I think in their native habitats they're on the good side.
Yeah.
So they have to be.
Yeah. They a lot of sometimes plants will adapt by having a shallower root system, because they're in an area that gets rain semi-frequently, but not a lot of it, and so that's how they gather moisture. But for a lot of California natives, again, the winter rains, their survival mechanism is to develop a deep root system, and that's true of those Matilda poppies. Rhamnea is the botanical name for that, in case. And I highly recommend that. Although, must be said, if they thrive, you're going to wind up with this huge patch.
They spread.
Yeah, they spread. Yeah.
And they're little prickly.
Yeah, there's a little bit of prickle. Not too bad. Okay, well, I think that's it for today. So thank you all for sending in.